Mr Chairman, I kind of was hoping that the Minister would be able to answer some questions, so it may well be that he might be in a better position to do so at some stage in the near future. But given that we now have the opportunity in front of the advisors that have come into the room, I just want to acknowledge the advisors and the work that they've done. I know that it's not appropriate to bring advisors into the debate while they're sort of sitting there, but it was an extraordinary effort, and it has been acknowledged in the second reading speeches, but I wanted to do so while they were actually in the House. The Minister can be very proud of the efforts that people went to, both in terms of Parliamentary Council, the officials who advised from the Ministry of Economic Development, and also our committee clerks who worked under extraordinary limits on time in order to produce what I think is a piece of legislation that now better reflects the original intent of the legislation. I've already confessed in the second reading on this bill that I know more about the detailed aspects of this piece of legislation than I ever knew when I was Minister, and feel very strongly that in the future we need to look at, in this technical area where there is non-partisan approach across the House, we need to look at getting out draft exposure bills so that people can actually see the detail and enable those important stakeholders to have some say over of how they consider the bill will work in practice once they've seen how it's written out. I had a number of people speak to me during the course of the passage of this legislation through our select committee. A number of people made the point to me that they hadn't really seen how the bill would operate, or how the legislation that had been passed prior to the last election, how that would work in practice until they really set about the task of implementing it. So there really wasn't any way of knowing in advance, but I think that if they'd had a piece of legislation to look at last year, a draft exposure bill, that I think we could have got through this process with a little bit more time and a little more opportunity to reflect on things in a way that we would normally expect. Now, the committee stages, of course, is an opportunity to go through some of the detail of the bill. One of the things that I want to query, though, is this question of that has been raised subsequent to the bill being reported back. There are some who've raised concerns. One concern was in particular related to the Mortgage Broking Association, where a number of members of the Mortgage Brokers Association have actually started the training in order to take them up to the authorised financial advisor level. Now, I want to place on record how much I approve of anyone in the financial advisory space getting themselves up to that level and beyond. So I totally want to support those brokers who, even though the legislation does not require them to reach that level of authorisation, the fact that they wish to gain the qualifications in order to meet that level, I want to say that that's a very good approach for them to take. Now, the position that we had put to us after we reported the bill back was that inadvertently we had prevented them from registering or becoming authorised financial advisors because the Securities Commission wouldn't have the power to actually grant them that status because they were ineligible, not advising on a Category 1 product. And so I certainly spoke to the Minister's office, and I know that other members of the committee did as well. And we realised that if we were to encourage better standards within the industry as a whole, then we wouldn't want that to be the case. I personally think it's a typical lawyer's interpretation of a piece of legislation which is looking for problems rather than solutions, and so I personally didn't think that it was intended to be restricted in that way, but I understand that the supplementary order paper now addresses that issue, and I'd like the Minister to explain.
Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chair, I just join with other